So used vehicle acquisition is a very hot topic right now. Every dealer that I interact with needs more of the right used car inventory on their lot. So let's talk about off-site appraisals, AKA sight unseen appraisals, virtual appraisals, blind appraisals, all depends on where you're at geographically. They call it different things in different parts of the country. Remote appraisals. So basically any used vehicle valuation that is not on site at the dealership would be considered off-site. Now, don't get me wrong, how off-site appraisals are handled can sometimes be as controversial as questioning somebody's religion or their political preference. While I'm not going to be talking about politics or religion during this particular episode, what I'm about to say is going to contradict many people's religion around legacy beliefs of how off-site appraisals should be handled in retail automotive. So let's dive right in. So you're probably thinking, Kramer, what exactly do you mean by off-site appraisal? You're talking about auctions, you're talking about, what are you, sight unseens? Well, one example of this would be somebody's researching car buying at their house at 10 o'clock at night. Dealership isn't open. Consumer wants to get an idea what the value of their trade-in is, and they're trying to figure it out on the dealership's website or throughout their digital retail experience. If that process isn't easy, that consumer is going to find another website that is. Give you another example. Could be a consumer that lives hundreds of miles away from the physical dealership of where they're searching. With the current national, new and used vehicle inventory shortage, which is getting significantly better, and this depends on the franchise. But consumers are willing, and proven last year, they're willing to travel longer distances. So those consumers often would like to get an idea what their trade-in value is prior to making the trip. They don't want to give up half of one of their days off, if not the whole day off, to accomplish absolutely nothing. So you can probably still just get them in, but you're going to be getting them in without their trade-in. And most likely a trade-in that meets, something on your buy list that you're looking for and you desperately need, and you have a wish list or something like that in your CRM looking for that vehicle. So it's important to remind yourself that when you're a consumer buying another product, that none of us want to waste time and make a trip to not accomplish anything. Time's quickly become the most valuable currency of the 2020s. So if your business fails to provide information to your clients easily, transparently, then you open yourself up to a competitor that eventually will. So as I travel all over the country in my new role, I frequently sit down and I ask dealership managers to describe to me what's a dealership showroom appraisal process look like. And it's fairly consistent when I ask various managers in the same dealership about that process. And it's not just consistent at like one rooftop. The description's fairly consistent across most dealerships across the country. The gap between different dealerships on the showroom appraisal process is pretty tight. There's some variance, but not a lot. But that's not the case when I ask those same dealers about how they handle off-site appraisals. The inconsistencies between dealerships when you're talking about off-site are vast, but the inconsistencies between managers at the same dealership can be vast. Not to mention the big gap in the perception of the process between the salespeople and the sales managers, not to mention the consumers. So my point in all of this is that every dealer has a process, but not every dealer truly knows what that process is. It could be that they don't want to deal with a certain manager, so they're just serving up a third-party website or a competitor's website that buys vehicles, and that's all they do. Because when leadership fails to define the process, the staff will eventually define it for themselves if they don't have clarity of what the process should be. It opens you up to ambiguity. And there's always a margin of error in any process. So isn't it better to define a good process that actually gets executed than a perfect process with inconsistent execution? For the first 25 years of my career, the industry believed that no one would ever buy a car unless they first test drove the vehicle. It was the way. It was our religion. We had no data to support our beliefs, but for your own sake, you should never question if we should be taking test drives. That's one of those things that we don't talk about here. And many dealerships, it was I brought it up even here recently, and it's like fighting words, depending on where you're at. But then we learned during COVID that when we had no inventory, we actually could sell vehicles without taking a test drive. And we started finding solutions. We realized, we've had inbound vehicles being sold for a long time. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that test driving vehicles does not add value. That's not the point of what I'm trying to make here. My point is that the industry still sold cars and dealers figured it out when they didn't have inventory on the ground and without test driving the vehicle. It also proved that the world was round when many of us thought that the world was flat. And I thought to myself, I wonder if we're looking at offsite appraisals like that without the data to support it, right? Is there a better way? Is there a different way to look at it? So here's the interesting dichotomy with used car appraisers in a dealership. It's my next world is round epiphany. In my travels, I interact with some of the most progressive dealers in the United States. And many of them have made the transition with consumers that we all made years ago buying online with simulcast auctions. So in 2002, live auction simulcasts were introduced to allow dealers to purchase auction units online. For those of us that were around back then to remember that. It seemed crazy at the time. So most dealers still wanted, I could buy it online, but I want to go visit in person. That way I can physically see it, touch it, smell it, feel it, everything, right? That I wanted to buy. There was skepticism. Nobody else is going to be able to value a vehicle the way that I can. They don't know how to fill out a condition report. I don't trust their condition reports. That's my competitive edge. What if there was a body panel that was painted by the best body shop in the world? Would they even know about it? Probably not. But how many times did that actually happen? And was it actually worth slowing down the process in the bigger picture for something that happens maybe 2% of the time? Now, fast forward to 2009, Great Recession, new car demands dried up, the demand intensified for used vehicles, and now it's a survival fight or flight mechanism going on. As a result, most dealers had a decision to make. They had to find a way to source more used vehicle inventory, so necessity took over, which is the mother of innovation. And most increased their existing level of risk tolerance and started acquiring used vehicle inventory via online channels and sourcing them remotely and not just valuing them remotely, all without touching, feeling, smelling, seeing the units in person before they were acquired, not finding out that one panel out of 100 that might have been missed. And guess what? They were all retailed. The slowdown of that previous process was unnecessary in retrospect. And now acquiring used auction vehicles online off simulcast and all the other, D2D auctions is a daily occurrence. And it's just the way. But what I find most interesting is that over the same 20 years, most dealership processes around offsite appraisals have not really changed much at all. The same used car managers that are willing to acquire used vehicles virtually on simulcast each week and pay up for vehicles that are high market day supply, not as much demand, those same managers are unwilling to provide even a close number, pending inspection, physical inspection, on a trade-in from a willing customer on a vehicle that's probably more desirable, more profitable than the simulcast auctions by providing a sight unseen appraisal that's competitive. So really, just keeping it real. How much less accurate, consistent is the consumer's condition report in the way that they describe their vehicle than the average auction CR? I think we all know there's some variability in both, but could the variance of those two versions, the customer CR and the auction CR, is the dollar amount of that miss more than the potential upside of moving your dealership from 30 or 40% trade-ins on the new vehicles sold to 50 or 60%? And what if that number was guaranteed by the largest wholesale entity in the world as an insurance policy? Accu-Trade can help with that if anybody's interested, just as an FYI. But the question is, if you need to get more used vehicle inventory, where do you start with all of this? Well, there's two opportunities there clearly weigh out the two biggest opportunities there are in automotive retail, and that's the offsite appraisals, sight unseen appraisals, and service drive acquisitions. As an industry, we've definitely overcomplicated the service drive acquisition topic to a mind-boggling point, but that's a separate episode, and we'll publish that next week. Let's go back to the sight unseen appraisal, offsite appraisal conversation. There's a perception that if a client physically, comes into the dealership to appraise their trade, dealership can acquire that vehicle for less money than they might be able to if they gave the most aggressive price for it online. The reality is, if you want to acquire more desirable vehicles at the auction, guess what? You pay more for them. And those lanes typically have the nicest cars and they bring the best money, but that dealer, best end user, ultimately sells them for more. Service drive appraisal, same way. But the industry needs to stop looking at, oh, what about, there's got to be 1 or 2% of the consumers that haven't researched their prior to arrival. They don't have the internet or they haven't done any research, which just isn't the case. I was recently down in Naples, Florida with a camera crew and walking up to total strangers on the street and asking if we could appraise their cars. So the first day, we appraised 15 vehicles. Now, when it's time to do the reveal, and it's the time for the big surprise, 14 out of 15 of those consumers already knew what their vehicle was worth because they appraised them online in the last 30 days. The 15th out of 15th, they appraised their vehicle 3 months prior. But all 15 had an idea what their vehicle was worth. Just like Zillow has demystified home values, consumers have found another way to get those same auto values. And I see this consistently across the country. That's a big reason that's contributing to why only 39% of consumers traded in a vehicle on their new vehicle purchase last year. Every 100 vehicles sold new had 39 trades. So where are the rest of these trades going? Now, if you don't remember anything else from this video, please remember this. The most ironic fact around offsite appraisals is that all used car managers ultimately want to physically appraise a trade-in vehicle, in person. And that's understandable. There's a perceived less risk doing it that way, especially if they come in using technology, an appraisal tool like Accu-Trade that integrates the OBD, mechanical diagnostic data into the appraisal condition report. So all you're left to do is it's just the cosmetic documentation that you got to keep track of. But the data clearly demonstrates that if somebody a dealer doesn't provide an exact offer, the amount of consumers that ultimately bring their vehicle in for a physical appraisal is significantly less as a result. So if you don't give them a number online, the amount of trades that are coming in are lower. So that doesn't mean they don't have a trade. They're just selling it prior to arrival, kind of like getting their own lending from a credit union prior to when they show up with a draft. So if you do provide an offsite appraisal, don't they physically have to come in and get it verified anyway? So in theory, to appraise more vehicles, offsite appraisals are actually the first step towards that result. Similar, if you want to sell a vehicle online, you have to begin with a transparent price payment for internet sales leads. If you don't provide that information up front, the lead, you might get the lead, but they might commit to an appointment, but they're not going to show. So why not just end up doing an offsite appraisal anyway? Because it ends up it's the gateway to a physical appraisal. And if you don't do it that way, you'll end up doing an offsite appraisal anyway, just on simulcast, instead of with a client who's buying a vehicle with you that's probably going to finance, buy some other products. You're going to end up buying that car from simulcast at the auction. So here's the bottom line. We need to start building our processes and strategies around what happens 98% of the time and stop worrying about what happens 2% of the time. It's a numbers game. It's very similar to presenting pricing and payments to as many clients as possible in the showroom. If you want to win more trade-ins, you got to present more appraisal values. You got to present them to as many clients as humanly possible. So in closing, we need to focus on tripling the number of vehicles we appraise. If you're appraising 300, your goal should be 900. And the way you do that is not by just get them in. Because if you get them in, which I'm sure a bunch of people are going to prove me wrong, I can still get them in. That's fine. But what percentage of trade-ins do you have off the new cars that you're selling? So whether you agree with me, completely disagree, or whatever, please let me know in the comments below. And if you have any questions or you're just beginning to rethink your offsite appraisal process based on the lower amount of trades that are coming back into the market, please check us out at www.accu-trade.com. That's ACCU-trade.com, or just click on the Accu-Trade link below.